Well, I do live in Southern California with my family, and not a few years ago, our extended family was up north. San Francisco is about as far as Dallas is from here, maybe a little bit further. And we were walking in this small town, kind of by the seaside called Sausalito. It's a beautiful little touristy town. It's fun. We were biking that day, parked our bikes, and we went walking up. And my wife was right next to me. I noticed these two college-age girls taking money to help care for the polar bears. I thought, well, that's interesting. There's no polar bears anywhere near San Francisco, but they care about the animals. I want to go have a conversation with them. Now, my wife knows what can happen sometimes because I love talking with people who see the world differently. Give and take, you learn something. So I said, I'll meet up with you in just a second. I just want to go ask some questions. So I walked up. I said, hey, I think it's great you're taking money to care for the polar bears. As you know, polar bears are a long ways away from here. I'm curious, do you also care about the beings in our midst that are actually the most vulnerable? In other words, are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? Can you just guess where this conversation went? Very quickly, the girl's like, oh, I bet you believe this now. I said, I didn't tell you anything about what I believe. I'm just curious. You care about these animals, and good for you, thousands of miles away. You can't even see. Do you care about the most vulnerable population in our own community? That's what I want to know. Well, she just starts mocking me. Calls one of her friends over. I'll never forget. She goes, hey, this guy was asking questions about abortion. She goes, oh, yeah? I had 3 abortions, and they felt good. The first girl looks at me. She goes, you know what? How do you even know embryos are real? I mean, do you have one inside of you? I said, how do you know polar bears are real? Do you have one inside of you? I actually think sarcasm is the 6th love language. There is a time and a place to call somebody out on their response. But I'll tell you, why do I bring this up? When we talk about the issue of pro-life and pro-choice and abortion, this is a sensitive, heated topic, isn't it? It's politically based, it's personal, it's experiential, it's moral. All of us have different experiences in greater degree with this. So the temptation is just say, let's not even talk about this. But friends, human lives are at stake. We can't not talk about it. In fact, I get a chance to speak for a lot of pregnancy resource centers. This is the very first one I've been invited to that is sponsored and funded and supported almost entirely, if not entirely, by a particular local church. That tells me you don't even just talk about this issue, but you make a difference when it comes to this issue. So you might want to know where I stand on this issue. So it might surprise you that they would bring in a speaker like me because I'm actually pro-choice. I'm pro-choice. I think a woman should get to make the most important choices in her life like the rest of us should. So when it comes to abortion, I am pro-choice if the unborn is not human. See, a woman should be able to choose where she lives, like the rest of us, her career, like the rest of us. But our choices are and should be limited when they directly affect the life of another human being. You see, when it comes to almost any ethical issue, you could talk about immigration, you could talk about euthanasia, gun control, race. In one sense, it almost always funnels down to one key question. One key question. So what is that question when it comes to abortion? What's the heart of the question? Well, this comes from a mentor of one of mine, Scott Klusendorf, gave me this illustration. I think it's beautiful. So I want you to imagine with me that after the service, before the football games, you go home and you decide to do the dishes. Now, for some of you, this is going to take a lot of imagination. You're doing the dishes, so your back is turned to the rest of the kitchen. And say you have a younger son or daughter, maybe a 5-year-old comes in behind you and says, hey, mommy, daddy, can I kill this? Before you say yes or no, what question would you ask? What is it exactly? If you turn around, it's a cockroach, you'd be like, yes. If you turn around, it's a little puppy, you'd be like, no, that's messed up. Why would you want to harm a puppy? Like, come on. If you turn around, the 5-year-old's like, hey, I pulled this infant out of a carriage down the street. Can I kill this? You'd be like, whoa, no. And even though you're only 5, you need serious counseling. Now, why treat a human being different than how you treat a cockroach? The answer is because of what something is. How we treat something is dependent upon what it is. It's why you have no moral obligation to a rock or a cockroach, but you do to a human being because what a human being is. The heart of the question and the moral debate is, what is the unborn? Friends, if the unborn is not human, then no justification is necessary. If the unborn is a member of the human race, then what justification is adequate to take the life of an innocent human being? See, some of you might be thinking, this is a political issue. Why are we talking about this in church? It's not at heart, it's a political issue. Do you know why Christians should care about this? Because the Bible says that all of us, and all in the Greek means all. Actually, the Hebrew, all of us are made in the image of God. Male, female, rich, poor, black, white, young, old, in the womb, out of the womb. All human beings bear the mark of the divine and have value because of the kind of thing that they are. That's why in the Roman Empire, they had a child they didn't want, they could just dispose of it. They had legalized infanticide. Not that different than what we have in New York today, but I digress. You know, Christians came along and said, they said, those are valuable human beings. And they started these things called orphanages to care for these valuable human beings. Friends, Christians started hospitals to care for the sick. Because young, old, wanted, not wanted, sick, well, black, white, rich, poor, all human beings are made in the image of God. That's why, yes, some bad things have been done in the names of Christians, and we should own those and we should mourn those. But the greatest act of justice has been done by Christians who say all lives matter, and we will fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Now, I also know something else about this audience. A handful of you I've met when I had a chance to speak at your wonderful Christian school a while ago. But I also know an audience this big, there's probably a few of you that are sitting there going, I can't believe I got myself into this again. It's Pro-Life Sunday. I should have known this because just being here brings up too much pain for me. I know an audience aside, there's a lot of you men and women who have experiences with abortion. And just this conversation is painful. Can I speak something I hope you know in the depth of your heart? That, friends, abortion is not the unforgivable sin. That God's grace knows no bounds for you and no bounds for me. God loves you and wants you to experience the freedom of that burden being lifted from you. I do a lot on social media. I have a YouTube channel, I'm on Instagram, I do Twitter, and during COVID, my son said to me, he's 17, he goes, Dad, if you want to reach my generation, you need to get on TikTok. I was like, okay, I'll start a TikTok account. So yes, I'm on TikTok. I think I've done 2 dances, but that's about it. The rest, I'm just trying to engage young people. And yeah, those ones are painful, but they're up there if you really need to see. This week, I was asked a question, and I answered it on TikTok, and the question was, how would I respond if my daughter told me she had an abortion? Now, keep in mind, if my daughter came to me and said she had an abortion, that would have been my grandchild. Here's what I said. I have a daughter who's 14, almost 15. She's blonde, surfer, lives in California, volleyball player. You can picture what she might look like, just a beautiful kid. If she came to me and said she had an abortion, I would look at her and I would say, you know I love you. Thank you for having the courage to tell me. I'd wrap my arms around her and I would cry with her and say, we are going to see this through together. If you have an experience with abortion, that's what your heavenly Father wants to do with you. He wants to look at you and say, you are the beloved. I forgive you. I love you. And you know one thing amazing about the For Her Pregnancy Resource Centers? They have a lot of pretty amazing resources they offer to the community. And by the way, when I got on their website yesterday checking it out, one of the things that I noticed, by the way, Planned Parenthood will charge for abortion because it's largely about money. What the Pregnancy Resource Center offers is free because it's about loving women and loving the unborn. That they offer counseling for post-abortion. I can't encourage you strong enough to go in there if you have an experience with this. Burying it inside is never going to make it go away. But you might be afraid, what if I show up? They might recognize me from church. Here's what they won't do. They won't go, oh my goodness, I've seen you in the third service. I never would have expected you. They're not going to say that. What they're going to say is, praise Jesus, and we rejoice that you are in a position to experience the freedom and the grace and the love that God has for you. Friends, please don't let your past determine your future. With that said, in the time that we have coming up, we're going to take to heart 1 Peter 3:15. It says, sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart, always be ready with an answer for the hope within, give it with gentleness, and give it with respect. Peter says to be ready with an answer for the hope within. So how can we be ready to give an answer for why we believe in life? And hopefully your conversation will go better than mine did in Sausalito. Typically it does. But here's a simple 3-step case. I would encourage you to write this down. Easy to memorize and it's powerful. I don't have to write stuff down. I have photographic memory. I just don't have any film. If you didn't understand that, ask somebody over 30. I make my students memorize this. It's simple, and it's intuitive, and it's powerful. Step number 1, the unborn is alive. The unborn is alive. You've maybe heard people say, well, we don't know when life begins. Let me tell you something, that's definitively false. The mom's alive, the dad's alive. The egg's alive, the sperm's alive. The embryo is alive. There's no period of non-life, biologically speaking, from mating until birth and beyond. We know it's alive. In fact, if you pick up an embryological textbook or a biology textbook, it will tell you certain criteria that characterizes life against non-life. And the unborn has all of it. For example, one criteria would be biological growth. Biological growth. So I still teach one high school class, and I'll tell my high school students, I'll say, okay, tell me the difference between, say you have like a big snowball kind of rolling down the hill, and it's getting and it's growing as it rolls down the hill, versus an embryo that grows. What's the difference? And they start to think about it. They say, well, the snowball is an accidental growth, just because of the environment externally adding on and the laws of gravity and the nature of snow. But embryological growth is growth because of the kind of thing that the embryo is. If it has the right environment and nourishment, it's meant and orchestrated towards biological growth because of what it is. The unborn experience is not external growth, but biological growth. Why? Because it's a living thing. It responds to stimuli. Friends, the unborn is alive. By the way, what does abortion do? It kills. You can only kill something that's first alive. There is no debate that the unborn is alive. But you'll still hear people say things like, well, we don't know. Let's just imagine we didn't know. Let me take you back. And by the way, this is not a political endorsement or criticism. I criticize worldview whenever and wherever I see it. But some of you might remember in 2008, it was a presidential campaign between Obama and McCain. And at a church very close to me called Saddleback Church, they had a very interesting event I thought was super helpful on the candidates, where at the huge audience, they televised it. Pastor Rick was asking both candidates the same questions. But neither candidate, they were like a locked up room somewhere, could hear the answer of what the other candidate said. I thought, oh, this is a really interesting, helpful kind of process for voters. Well, one of the questions came up about life. And they just said, McCain, do you believe in life? When do you think it begins? And McCain's like, life begins at conception, I'm pro-life. They asked Obama, and he gave a very interesting response that I've thought about since. His response was, he said, I don't know when life begins. Anyone remember the exact line he said? He said, it's above my pay grade. Now, that's a very interesting response. In other words, he was saying, I'm not sure when life begins. I can't make that call. Well, let's imagine that he's right, that we don't know. What if he was right that we didn't know when life began? Is that a justification to go ahead and take a potential life, or a requirement to protect it because there's a chance that life must be present? You see how this works? Even if we concede that we didn't know when life began, the burden of proof is always on the life taker, not the one who protects life. One of the few presidents who actually wrote a book while sitting as president was Ronald Reagan. He wrote a book in 1980. How many of you know of this book? I'm curious, by show of hands. That's incredible. A sitting president wrote a book in 1980. You know why? Because the secular press didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to make you aware of it. You know what it was called? Abortion and the Conscience of a Nation. 6 to 7 years after Roe versus Wade. You know what he said in there? He said, if we didn't know when life begins, he goes, that means we protect life. He said, for example, what if we come across a body laying on the floor and we're not sure if it's alive or if it's dead? Do we go ahead and bury it? If there's a chance of life, you protect it. You only bury it if you 100% know that there's no life. So friends, even if we didn't know when life began, we should still err on the side of protecting it because we might take life. But in fact, we do know that the unborn is alive. Step number one. Step number two, the unborn is separate from the mother. So step one, the unborn is alive. Number two, the unborn is separate from the mother. Now, what do I mean by this? You might be thinking, okay, wait a minute. The unborn is attached to the mom. It's dependent upon the mom. It's inside the mom. That's true. But I mean it's a separate organism from the mother. It's a distinct biological organism. And in all states, you should know this. Why? Because at week 6, roughly, the unborn has its own heartbeat. Why its own heartbeat? Because it's a distinct organism. It can have its own blood type. It can have a distinct biological sex in 50% of the cases from the mother. If the mom and dad are of mixed race, it might have a different skin color than the mother. It has its own unique DNA fingerprint from the moment of conception, distinct from the mother. So yes, the unborn is inside the mom, it's distinct from, and it's dependent upon the mom, but it is a separate biological organism from the mother. It's a distinct organism. So maybe you've heard somebody say something like this: a woman has a right to do whatever she wants to with her body. This is called the bodily autonomy argument. So let's just think about it. Let me say it again. I want you to think, is this true? Are you ready? I'm going to read it. You can tell me if this is true or not. A woman has a right to do whatever she wants to with her own body. That's false, isn't it? Some of you decide, because we still have time at the end of the service before the football games start, that you want to go streaking naked down Main Street. That's not going to work here in Texas. It might work in California, sadly. But if you say, it's my body, I can do what I want, the police and the government is going to deem it differently. And I hope you don't take any offense to this, but they're probably going to say, you're harming us with your body. That's true for all of us, right? We actually know that we can't do anything we want to with our bodies. In fact, my right to my body is limited when it potentially harms yours. Now, again, please hear me. I'm not trying to make a political statement in this comment, but it's very interesting to me. You have people say, a woman has a right to her body. The government can't interfere. Get your hands off my body, but wear a mask, and you have to get vaccinated with your body. And don't mishear me. I'm not making a comment about whether you should wear a mask or get vaccinated. That's not my point. I'm talking about the logic. People say bodily autonomy here, but then they don't apply it there. You can't have it both ways. What's interesting, again, about masks and about the vaccine is the reasoning is your body might harm mine. Notice the word might. In abortion, there is no might. It's guaranteed. So if you don't buy the bodily autonomy argument when it comes to vaccines and masks, then you certainly shouldn't buy it when it comes to abortion. Friends, when someone says they have a right to do whatever they want to with their own body, first off, we know that is false. And second, it's not the woman's body. Step number 1, the unborn is alive. Step number 2, the unborn is distinct from the mother. Step number 3, the unborn is human. The unborn is human. We have 3 kids in our family. I have a son who's a high school senior. I have a daughter who's a high school freshman, and a 3rd grader who's just awesome. Redhead like his grandpa. Just cute, fun kid who just survives to get a word in this family because he's the youngest. When my wife was pregnant 9 years ago with Shane, our youngest, because we noticed, my wife and I, son and daughter, there's a level playing field, boy and girl here. This child is going to tip the scales. And I had 3 sisters growing up, so I'm not going to lie, I had a little bias in this. I remember having conversations with my wife. I was like, what do you think we're going to have? A boy or a girl? Right? I'll tell you what conversation we didn't have. I didn't say, what do you think we're going to have? And I was like, man, I would love a cheetah. My wife was like, I love a kitten. That'd be so wonderful. You laugh because it's absurd. Because you know something intuitively, even if you can't give the formal biological name for it. If mom and dad are human, its offspring is... That's actually called the principle of biogenesis. Things reproduce after their kind. Now, I hope you grasp the significance of what we did. We just looked, scientifically speaking, at facts that, friends, are not contested. Well, everything's contested on the internet, but significantly contested. From the moment of conception, there is a living human being distinct from the mother. From the moment of conception, we have a full member of the human race. The question is, will we protect and care for this human being? You see, there's a very simple way to put this philosophically. You tell me, who gets human rights? Human beings do. Number 1, humans get human rights. Step number 2, you tell me, is the right to life a human right? Yeah, I can't think of something more basic to being human than the right to life. So humans get human rights. The right to life is a human right. The unborn is human. Therefore, the unborn has a right to life. Honestly, logically speaking, it's that straightforward and simple. Now, I'm not saying emotionally it's simple. I'm not saying making the choice is simple. I'm saying the case for life is powerful and simple if we'll see it. But here's one of the ways. There's even more challenges, and I've covered this on my YouTube channel so many times because this issue is so important to equip Christians. But one of the ways people will push back on this is they'll say, okay, maybe the unborn is human, but it's not a what? It's human, but it's not a person. Because persons have the right to life, not humans. Do you see that move? Humanity is more of a biological character. Personhood is more of a philosophical characteristic. So what happens is the pro-choicers will try to find a way to say, okay, the unborn's human, but it's not a person. And since it's not a person, it doesn't have the right to life. Now, if they're going to do this, they're going to have to come up with some criteria by which they can say that the rest of us have personhood and the right to life, but the unborn does not have personhood, thus it doesn't have the right to life. So to make this argument, pro-choicers are going to have to give us some criteria that disqualifies the unborn without disqualifying the rest of us. Now, as far as I can tell, there's 4 key differences between the born and the unborn. And it's an acronym. I didn't come up with this, but I love it. And I also would make my students memorize this. The acronym is SLED. The first one is S for size. Is it true that the unborn has a different size, namely smaller, than one outside of the womb? In almost all circumstances, yes. Here's the question. Does your value and your right to life come from your size? Does it? Let's imagine for a minute that it did. Who would be more valuable, men or women? Men, do not answer that. You know, the tallest on average are the Swedes. I think the average male is about 6'1", and the Japanese are the shortest, about 5'5". Do Swedish people have more valuable than Japanese because they're taller and bigger? That's crazy. Right? Who has more value, Shaquille O'Neal or Kevin Hart? It's a mistaken question. Now, if I said who has more value to help the Lakers win a championship, then you'd say Shaquille O'Neal, because we're talking about what we call instrumental value to accomplish a goal. But if we're talking about intrinsic value, we know Shaquille is not any more valuable or less valuable than Kevin Hart because they're both fully, equally human. Even kids' books know that our value doesn't come from our size. You know the Dr. Seuss book, Horton Hears a Who? What does Horton famously say? A person is a person, no matter how small. So yes, the unborn is of a different size, but smallness is not a sufficient criteria to deny personhood. That's the S. L is level of development. Is the unborn less developed than those outside of the womb? The answer is yes. So here's the question. Does your value and your right to life come from your level of development? Of course not. Development is a continuum from conception through life. You see, if your value is based on your level of development, then your value would be growing and changing and adopting over time, and those who are more developed would have more value than those who are less developed. Last I checked, it's the reverse. In fact, it's those who are less developed that are more vulnerable and have a greater protection mandate from the rest of us who are more developed. Right? I mean, they say your brain's not fully developed until your mid or later 20s. Does that mean a 30-year-old is more valuable than a 20-year-old? No. Are 20-year-olds more valuable than teenagers? Well, that is open to debate. Of course not. Are teenagers more valuable than children? Children than infants? Infants than one inside the womb? No. Friends, what a dangerous road to go down to say that your value comes from how developed you are. That's a dangerous road. So the unborn is different in size, different in development, but that's not enough to deny it personhood. The third E is environment. The unborn's in a different location. Here's the question. Does your value change when your location changes? No. I looked up last night to get the latest statistics of the most premature child that was born that survived. And it was in July 2020, born at 21 weeks. 132 days premature this child was born. And I saw a picture, and you could just hold this child like in your palm like this. And it survived. And the doctors worked heroically to save the life of this child. Imagine they take the child out, its vitals kind of stabilize, and it's sleeping. And a doctor walks up and kills that child. What would we call that? Murder. Now just think about this. Same doctor, same physical act that takes its life, same child, same age, but you change the location and put it inside the mother, and all of a sudden it's legal and moral? There's something wrong with this. It's the same child. It's the same human being. The unborn is different size, different level of development, different environment, and degree. And D is degree of dependency. Degree of dependency. Is the unborn uniquely dependent upon the mom? Yes. But does our right to life come from our dependency upon others? If so, what about people on kidney machines? Do they lose the right to life because of their dependency? Of course not. Now, just imagine with me that you're going snowboarding someday. Now, I know that takes some imagination being here in Texas. That's a long drive. I left from Oklahoma, drove 16 hours, and was still in your state at the end of the day. So imagine you go snowmobiling, and all of a sudden you see a snowmobile that's flipped over, a man, presumably a father who's out cold, unconscious, and a 2-year-old sitting there in the freezing snow, completely 100% dependent upon you for survival. Do you have the moral right to walk away, or the moral responsibility, because of the dependency of this child, to do everything you can to protect its life? I think you know the answer to that. Friends, there are differences between those in the womb and out of the womb, but they're not enough. There's nothing significant to deny personhood without turning around and denying some other persons in our society who we know are human beings with the right to life. You see, you might be thinking, but an embryo, it doesn't look like a human being. And the answer is, yes, it does. It looks exactly like a human being is supposed to look at that stage of development. Let's face it, friends, in our country, we have a sad legacy of deciding that certain human beings who maybe don't look like the rest of us according to our criteria don't qualify as full persons, and then we discriminate against them. That's a sad legacy in our country of deciding, well, certain human beings, you don't get full human rights. What a shame. There's a movie that came out in 1980 called The Elephant Man. And it was the story of John Merrick, who became just significantly disfigured. And they called him the Elephant Man because his whole body was disfigured. And in this movie, there's a scene where he's walking through a subway room. And he wears a paper bag so people don't see him and freak out. He falls, the bag comes off, and this little girl sees him and just does what a kid would do. She screams. I'd never seen a person like this. And these people start chasing him through the subway, corner him in a bathroom, yelling obscenities at him, angry at him, wanting to take his life. And at one moment, he stops in this powerful scene. He stops and he screams out. He goes, I am not an animal. I am a human being. And you see their faces, shamed at how they were treating a human being. And they walk away because they realized what John Merrick was. He maybe didn't look like the rest of us or the way we think you should look, but he was a full member of the human race. That's why we're pro-life. Because every life, rich, poor, male, female, black, white, Jew, Gentile, in the womb, out of the womb, made in the image of God. Amen. I have a chance to turn it over here to see a video about Audra Cantrell. And I first met her. I saw the video. She sent it to me a few days ago. I watched it. But in some ways, I met Audra yesterday, but I didn't really have to meet her. Do you know why? Because I've met dozens of Pregnancy Resource Center directors, and they're all the same. Here's what I mean by this. Every Pregnancy Resource Center director I've met, number one, doesn't take no for an answer, has an unending passion for women and for the unborn, and just has this knack of rallying people together and making a difference for the lives of people in our community. Of course, I wanted to meet her, but the moment I met her, I was like, yep, I know exactly why she's in this position. You are blessed to have somebody who you can partner with, and who your church says you'll partner with, and your entire staff is amazing, to make a difference right here, right now. Look, Jesus said, leave the 99 and find the one. It's easy to get discouraged at things we can't control, but we can control giving an offer to women to have a safe place. And many women are responding, and lives are being saved.